The wind moved softly through the tall grass outside the small wooden cabin, carrying with it the smell of dust and distant rain. The sky over the western plains had already begun turning shades of orange and purple as the sun slipped behind the hills. It was the quiet time of evening when the land seemed to breathe slowly after a long day of heat. Inside the cabin, a young woman named Hannah Cole stirred a pot of thin vegetable soup over a small iron stove. The flame crackled gently beneath the pot, while shadows from the lantern danced along the rough wooden walls. Hannah lived alone. Her life had never been easy. 2 years earlier, sickness had taken her husband, leaving her with a tiny piece of land, an aging mule, and more debt than she knew how to pay. Most folks in the nearby town of Silver Ridge believed she would lose the land within months, but Hannah was stubborn. She planted vegetables in the rocky soil, chopped her own firewood, fixed her own fences, and refused to beg for help. Some nights she went to bed hungry, but she never complained. The evening seemed peaceful until the mule outside suddenly snorted nervously. Hannah paused. Animals often sensed trouble before people did. She stepped quietly toward the small window and peered out into the fading light. At first she saw nothing but the dusty road stretching past her property. Then she noticed a dark shape slowly moving toward the cabin. A man, he walked with the slow, uneven steps of someone who had been traveling for a long time. Hannah's heart beat faster. A woman living alone had to be careful. She reached for the old shotgun resting beside the door. It wasn't loaded, but most strangers didn't know that. The man finally reached the edge of the yard and stopped. He was tall, wearing a worn cowboy hat and a long coat covered in road dust. His boots looked like they had walked across half the country. "Ma'am," he called out in a tired voice, "I hate to bother you this late." Hannah opened the door just enough to see him clearly. His face looked rough from the sun and wind, and there was a deep scratch across his cheek. But what caught her attention most were his eyes. They didn't look dangerous. They looked exhausted. "What do you want?" she asked cautiously. "Just a place to rest for the night." He replied, "My horse went lame a few miles back. I've been walking since morning." Hannah studied him carefully. Strangers could bring trouble. Outlaws sometimes pretended to be travelers. But the man didn't seem threatening. In fact, he looked like he might collapse if he stood much longer. "You armed?" she asked. He slowly lifted his coat to show his belt. "No gun, no ma'am," he said. Hannah hesitated. Her life had taught her to be cautious, but it had also taught her what it meant to struggle alone. Finally she stepped aside. "You can come in," she said, "just for the night." Relief washed across the man's face. "Thank you kindly." He removed his hat respectfully as he stepped into the small cabin. The warmth of the stove filled the room, and the smell of soup made his stomach growl loud enough to make Hannah almost smile. "Name's Daniel," he said. "Hannah." He sat carefully at the small table while she poured a bowl of soup. It wasn't much, just potatoes, carrots, and broth. But he ate it like it was the finest meal he had ever tasted. "You live here alone?" he asked after a moment. "Yes." "That must be hard." Hannah shrugged. "Hard doesn't scare me." Daniel nodded slowly, clearly impressed. The lantern flickered as night settled fully outside. For a while they talked quietly. Daniel asked about the land, the crops, the nearby town. Hannah noticed something strange as they spoke. Despite his worn clothes and dusty boots, the man carried himself differently than most drifters she had seen. His voice was calm and steady, and he spoke politely, like someone raised with good manners. "Where are you headed?" she asked. Daniel leaned back slightly. "Just traveling for now. Running from something." A small smile appeared on his face. "No, just trying to remember what matters." Hannah wasn't sure what that meant, but she didn't press him. Later that night, she laid out a blanket near the fireplace for him. "It's not much," she said. "It's more kindness than I expected to find on the road." Before blowing out the lantern, Hannah glanced at him. "Most folks wouldn't stop for a stranger," she said. Daniel looked at her thoughtfully. "Most folks forget what it's like to need help." The cabin grew quiet as they both fell asleep. Morning arrived with soft sunlight spilling through the window. Hannah woke early, as she always did, and stepped outside to feed the mule. When she returned inside, Daniel was already awake, fixing the loose hinge on her door. "You didn't have to do that," she said. He shrugged. "Figured it was the least I could do." After breakfast he prepared to leave. "I won't forget your kindness," he said, placing his hat back on his head. Hannah walked him to the road. "Safe travels," she said. Daniel hesitated for a moment before speaking. "If you ever find yourself in trouble, remember the name Daniel Harper." Then he tipped his hat and began walking down the dusty road. Within minutes he disappeared over the hill. Hannah returned to her quiet life. Days passed, then weeks. Summer turned into early autumn, and the nights grew colder. Hannah's problems, however, grew worse. The bank in Silver Ridge had finally sent a notice demanding payment on the land. If she couldn't pay within 30 days, the property would be taken. She sat at the kitchen table one evening staring at the letter. There was no way she could earn that kind of money in time. Still, she refused to give up. She worked longer hours, trying to sell vegetables in town, but it barely covered food. One afternoon, as she returned from town, she noticed something strange near her cabin: a group of riders. 3 wagons stood in the yard, and several well-dressed men were measuring the land. Anger rose in her chest. She marched forward. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded. One of the men turned toward her. He wore a neat suit and carried a clipboard. "Miss Hannah Cole?" "Yes." He smiled politely. "We've been looking for you." "For what?" "Regarding your property." Hannah's stomach sank. "I told the bank I need more time." "Oh, the bank sold the debt." The man said calmly. "Sold it." She repeated. "Yes, ma'am." Her hands clenched. "So you're here to throw me off my own land." The man looked confused. Actually, quite the opposite. He reached into his pocket and handed her a document. Hannah read it slowly. Her eyes widened. The debt had been completely paid, every cent. She looked up in shock. "Who did this?" The man smiled. "A Mr. Daniel Harper." Hannah felt her heart skip. "The traveler." She whispered, "Yes, ma'am." "Where is he?" Before the man could answer, the sound of approaching hooves echoed across the field. Hannah turned. A rider was approaching from the far side of the land. The moment he came closer, she recognized him. Daniel, but he looked very different now. His clothes were clean. His horse was a magnificent black stallion, and several ranch hands followed behind him. He dismounted and walked toward her. Hannah crossed her arms. "You've got some explaining to do." Daniel chuckled softly. "Fair enough. Are you some kind of rancher?" "Something like that." One of the men behind him cleared his throat. "Miss Cole," he said, "Mr. Harper owns most of the cattle operations across 3 counties." Hannah stared at Daniel. "You're telling me the man who slept on my floor is rich?" Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. "I prefer the term comfortable." She shook her head in disbelief. "You lied to me." "No," he said gently. "I just didn't tell you everything." "Why?" He looked around the land thoughtfully. "Because I wanted to see how people treat strangers when they think they have nothing to gain." Hannah frowned. "And what did you learn?" Daniel smiled warmly. "I learned that a strong, kind woman lives in this cabin." Her anger softened slightly. "You paid my debt." "Yes." "Why?" Daniel met her eyes. "Because kindness deserves to be returned." The wind moved softly through the grass as they stood there in silence. Finally Hannah asked quietly, "What happens now?" Daniel's smile widened. "Well, I was hoping you might consider a partnership." "Partnership? I've got more land than I can manage," he said. "And you've got more determination than most ranchers I know." Hannah studied him carefully. "And what kind of partnership are we talking about?" Daniel tipped his hat slightly. "The kind where nobody faces the hard days alone." For the first time since her husband died, Hannah felt something she thought she had lost forever: hope. And as the sun set over the wide western plains, the poor woman who had once given a stranger shelter realized that single act of kindness had quietly changed her life forever. Cowboy Sunrise